All right, fun joke to start us off, which if you've been to MES, you may have heard this joke before, and I apologize. But how do you tell the difference between an introverted and extroverted engineer?
One goes into sales.
That's a good answer, Doug. One looks at their own shoes, when an extroverted looks at yours. There you go. You're welcome.
Nice.
All right, friends. May I introduce to you to the world-renowned great collector of antique umbrellas, world parkour champion, and grower of rare plants, but also, in reality, the president of JBS, Joe Rose.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's just
None of that is true. She's hallucinating just like AI does, so we'll talk about that in our talk today. So thank you for coming. I think the purpose of this talk is to talk about Agentic, what it is, why we should care, how you should use it, some real use cases, and so on. So hopefully you find this useful. You did not get the ad-free version of Netflix, so let's talk a little bit about JBS, our professional services company. We help you build and integrate this stuff. There's salespeople who, if you look even remotely interested, they're going to be pouncing you as soon as you walk out of the room.
Over here.
And we work with a lot of companies that attend these events, small and medium-sized businesses, at least if you're thinking like Fortune 50, we call you guys small and medium. But yeah, good logo. So let's talk about this paradigm shift. GPT comes out, the world is amazed. We can now write term papers in a blank, answer Tinder messages, whatever. And that's probably been what AI has meant to a lot of people for, say, the last 2-3 years. But then you're starting to hear this word agentic. And it's got a lot of marketing buzz, sounds really cool. There's salespeople saying $10,000 a month license, and we will do all this stuff for you, and it's going to be awesome. All right, so what is it actually from a technical perspective? What it really means is we get the agent to actually do stuff, call APIs, move files, whatever, instead of just creating text. So generating your emails for you or summarizing or all that kind of stuff, very useful. There's no doubt about that, it's very useful. But getting it to actually take action, that's the next step. That's what we call agentic. So how does that work? There we go. He was a little late with the key, but we still got it. My agent is a little slow today. When you hear about it from a sales pitch perspective, you would think it's some kind of magical new technology. It took billions of dollars to invent. It's very hard to integrate with, and you need $400,000 a year computer science PhDs to implement this stuff. The reality is, we kind of took the existing models and we said, well, if they're really good at writing term papers and Tinder messages, why can't they write API calls? So you can literally prompt GPT right now and say, give me an API call to call the Salesforce CRM system to add a user, and it will spit it out. Here's exactly how you make that API call. And then somebody said, okay, well, what if we had a way to kind of chain these one after the other into the LLM? So we could say, hey, LLM, I want to add a user to Salesforce. How would I do that? Here's the API call. I take that API call, I run it, and I give it back to the LLM, and I say, here's the results of the API call. What should I do next? Then all of a sudden you have a working agent. It's really two parts. It's the LLM and it's the harness. So the LLM is Claude or GPT or Gemini, and the harness is just the thing that feeds calls into and out of the LLM. So it seems magical and it seems whimsical, mystical, and it does all this cool stuff, and everybody wants to charge you thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of dollars for it. It's really not. It's just having an LLM generate API payloads and call stuff with it. So it's not nearly as hard to work with or hard to integrate as some would have you believe, especially when they price this stuff. People want an arm and a leg. So MCP, where does that fit into play? So if you have APIs that are broadly accessible on the internet and the models are already aware of them and it's read the documentation and kind of understands how to call your API, it's great. You can just say, hey, call Salesforce and it will do it. If you have a series of internal APIs and they're not documented, they're not published, you need to inform that LLM somehow. What is the structure of your API payload? What are the parameters? What's the validation that happens? What business function is actually carried out when you call this API? Rate limits, all that kind of stuff. So when we used to give those to developers, say me giving it to you or me giving it to you, we would use something called the Swagger documentations, human readable, describes what the API does and all those things. MCP is just fancy Swagger for LLMs. It's written in such a way where LLMs can easily digest it. So why is this important? As you start to get more pressure to implement agentic workloads, and you know, how do you actually do it? The how question is always a tough one. You're going to have to start building these MCP connectors so that these agents can actually do stuff with your off-the-shelf software that maybe is not readily available on the internet to understand, or your custom inside the house. And MCP doesn't necessarily mean API too. You can have an MCP that describes to an LLM how to move a file back and forth to something really old, like the S400 machine or something. But just think of MCP as like that's the universal language that agents can use to communicate. You don't have to use it, but it makes it a lot less expensive. You spend a lot less tokens processing data when you have MCP in place. All right, so I alluded to the fact that everybody wants to sell you these licenses and make it seem like it's really hard. It's really not. So I was a developer for a long time, 20 years, and you know, there are certain integrations that would scare the crap out of me. ERP, for instance, always a painful integration, or OMS or CRM. Those are all tough, tons of calls, tons of error checking, retries, all that kind of stuff. LLMs are really, really simple. You give them a prompt, you give them some parameters and some tuning, call it, and it gives you back an answer. One of the simplest integrations that you could ever do is integrating with an LLM. So if you are thinking of, man, agentic and MCP, and that's going to be really difficult, and what are we going to do? There are a ton of tools that exist out there that can call an API and do something with the result. So like a Fivetran or any of those other automation, no-code, low-code solutions that could call APIs, they can all integrate with LLMs. And then you can sit in your office for a few hours, and you can say, here's my LLM, here's my system. I'm going to wire in an HTTP call to call it and take that result and push it somewhere. And then you're going to go to your boss, hey boss, didn't cost us $10,000 a month in licensing, I just implemented an agentic workload. Really not that hard. All right, so how do you do this in an even more fine-grained or specific use case? So how many of you guys have a BI stack anywhere in your enterprise? That's a lot of hands up. How many of you have BI jobs that run? I hope. How does the data get in there? These BI tools have the ability to suck data out of a database table, shadow pointing instead of laser pointing, much more effective. Take that data, make an HTTP call, and then feed it through the rest of the job. So if I said tomorrow, you guys have 150 BI jobs, I want you to add 150 first. No one's going to blink an eye and think that's some kind of, oh, we're never going to get that done, and that's too difficult, and that's going to take years. It's just one more BI job. That's the answer. That's how you implemented an agentic workload in your enterprise. Right? You wrote a BI job that has an HTTP call in the middle of it that does something. All right? So I hope at this point, we've kind of driven home that message that this stuff is not as hard as it seems. So let's get into some actual use cases here. So we had a customer had written kind of the everything app. It did order management, customer management, inventory management, you name it. It was an offshore team. They'd worked on it forever. Code base was massive, and it was really buggy, and there was a ton of manual email the developer and they fix stuff type of action that would happen, just in terms of day-to-day operational things. The challenge was that that team was in a different time zone, and for something like, hey, this order got messed up, it could take them a week, sometimes it could take them 2-3 weeks to figure out what happened and push a fix, update the database, whatever. So there are a lot of companies out there that have this problem of, you know, our business model was custom enough that we have some custom software, and you know, figuring out what happens when stuff goes wrong or whatever, that's challenging. So what we did, we took our Claude LLM, we wired up the Claude code harness, connected it to each of those disparate systems, and then it is now their front line of support for IT issues. So if somebody says, I want a user created, it can call the user creation APIs. If somebody says, an order needs to be refunded, but the payment appears to have failed, the order is stuck, it can call the appropriate systems to refund that order, update it in the database, whatever. So kind of a real cool example of how you can replace an entire offshore support team with a Claude code implementation where, you know, You can give it a prompt, check the database, give you some answers. It'll look at code and find code bugs. It'll triage the actual support tickets themselves and write recommended replies. So this tooling does a really good job of that. I think it's a pretty cool use case. So if you're getting killed, kind of support on custom applications, it can really help you. All right, so this is a use case where this window retailer had a ton of manual processes. Was this the one with 34 or was it 100 people?
100.
100. So they have a huge sales team. They'll go out, they'll quote things, they'll take all handwritten notes, and then they'll shove those notes over and say, go make it happen, give me my commission, and all of a sudden it's the operation team's problem to source the right materials, get the custom windows built, get the people out, the installers out. And a lot of times, what happens, you've ordered the wrong thing, or you've given up so much margin because you priced it incorrectly, or what have you. But you can just hear me describe it. There's so many different things involved. It's sourcing, it's pricing, it's scheduling. So the cost to build a custom application from top to bottom that would do all of this, very, very expensive. The cost to build a lightweight application where we have an LLM in the middle, it gets fed prompts and it gives the answers as to what should happen, what systems should be called, which you've done, much less significant development effort. So kind of an example of where 3 or 4 years ago, you would say custom software doesn't make sense to solve a problem like this because it's so damn expensive that if the cost of fixing the problem versus the cost of building the software wasn't a good ROI. These LLMs are so good at routing this kind of stuff and handling this edge case and exception handling now that in some cases, it can say, yes, this makes sense now to go custom because it would be so much less expensive. That and, actually writing the code itself is so much faster too. There we go, all right. Lost him for a second. The agent fell asleep. We prompted him back awake. All right. So one of the plain Jane, simple use cases that I think you can take away from this and hopefully kind of think of your own, because the ones I've given so far, they're somewhat complicated. They touch a lot of systems. They can be intimidating. This one is dead simple to implement. Everyone gets, I hope, well, maybe not everyone, I shouldn't say this, probably. Most people get invoices. And when those invoices come in, AP goes and checks where we charge the right amount, whether that be the price per unit or hourly bill rate, whatever. And if the amount looks good, we approve it. If it doesn't, we don't. For some companies, that's not a lot. For some companies, there's thousands and thousands of invoices they get every month. So an LLM is smart enough that if you give it the invoices and then say, here is a database table that has all of the contracts, tell me if this invoice is compliant with the contract, it will give you a yes, a no, or I'm not really sure. So you can take the AP reconciliation process and kind of gate 70, 80, 90% of it with pretty confident decisions of, hey, these invoices are good to just kind of clear all the way through. And in this particular case, this implementation can be done using that BI job example that I showed earlier, where the BI job can look at the invoice from Dynamics. It can then go search for the contract, push those to the LLM, right? And it will give that answer back, and then you just say, hey, BI job, take that result and email it out to AP. So if you've ever done a BI job before, if you have BI jobs in your enterprise, not a very difficult BI job to write. And then you'll be able to run your hand to your boss, hey, we got our first agentic workload. It was really simple, and it's gonna save the accounting team a ton of muscle and fuss. So I think that's a pretty cool use case. All right, this one is a few different LLM use cases blended together, which I think is pretty cool. We're working with a real estate startup. When they post a listing to MLS, a lot of times their agents would do nothing but upload the photos and then writing the actual listing text. It's always going to be like, it's a nice, wonderful home. That's it. And they wouldn't fill out all the appropriate fields, all that. So we have an agent that gets triggered, scans the photos, looks for all the appropriate features, writes the description, and then updates the MLS listing with what each of the different attributes are. So I think that's a pretty useful. So there's a little bit of agentic here, there's a little bit of traditional LLM create content, there's a little bit of LLM recognize images, so all cool stuff. Right. So this is a cool one. So we've all had that request from a CEO, either us on the sales side or you, We need to hook AI up to our data so we can ask it questions and we can make decision making better. And so you make your BI chatbot and you can ask it questions about the data that you already have. Great. What's cool about this one, you can actually wire the LLMs up into the underlying BI stack, whether it be a Snowflake or a Bedrock or a whatever, and give it the ability to run different types of models, whether they be ML models or just creating a new denormalized view, whatever. And so you can ask it questions about data that it may not necessarily have, and it can answer those by running those models. So that's more of an agentic workflow. So in this particular use case here, what would happen if our margin, what would happen to our margins if we raise prices by 5%? To actually answer that kind of question appropriately, you actually need to run some ML, right? It's called a price sensitivity analysis, because typically when you raise prices, order volume drops. You don't know by how much, or maybe it's like oil and volume's only gonna drop a little, but not one-to-one with price. Right? There's always a certain minimum number of oil consumption, right? So no matter how high the price gets, it's always gonna have a certain floor. The ML usually is really good at that kind of stuff, but who wants to go do that by hand? You can have your agent go run an ML model given your cloud backend and do that. So I think it's a pretty cool mix of kind of chat and agentic. All right, so document verification. This is a cool use case where we learned a lot, and I'm going to kind of pass some of that along to you. Kind of what to do, what not to do. But let me start with the problem first. So we work with a large car retailer. They have a lot of sales associates. The process of selling a car, like how can we train somebody to where they can actually sell a car, is really complicated. The most complicated transaction is a trade-in with negative equity. So you have a car, it's worth $30,000, you owe $40,000 on it. You actually have to hand a check to them for $10,000 to pay off that car, and then you're getting a new loan at the same time. Maybe there's a down payment on the loan too, which is a separate payment. You also need to do kind of like the blocking and tackling type of stuff, like verifying the driver's license, the insurance, the title, all that kind of stuff. So the old system was so complicated to use, and one screen after another screen after another screen after another screen. It would take them 6 months to train an associate before they could become productive. Now we're talking about salespeople making in the $20 to $30 an hour range, so this high turnover. And so when you're saying we need 6 months before someone's productive and it's a high turnover job, you're bleeding, you're hemorrhaging money. So the first approach of this was, let's take all of the rules that go into letting a car go out the door and put it into one giant LLM prompt, and then say, hey LLM, here are all the rules. Can I sell this car? What else do I need? That was a disaster. The LLMs can hallucinate. And they also tend to perform more poorly the larger the prompt is, okay? So the kind of meet in the middle approach that worked really, really well in this use case was, let's not abandon the old system, but let's have the LLM drive the old system. So to the user, they're getting this interactive human, I have insurance but not driver's license yet. The old system would just say, I can't even let you pass this step until you have it. The LLM doesn't care. Okay, I'll just hold on to it until it's ready. But we weren't having cars being sold, or we didn't have a title, or we didn't have the right amount of money, or the kind of hallucination that an LLM would make that would be a mistake would cost you money or make you do something illegal. So pretty cool on implementation. So the lesson there is, don't overload the prompt, don't discard your existing systems if they have really good business logic written into them. That continues to be a good thing to have in place and to do. Final takeaway. No one likes going to mycoolAIchat.internalcompanyname.com to access this stuff. It's yet another portal they have to log into. It's yet another thing they have to bookmark. It is relatively trivial to wire these things into Teams, into Slack, into email, even into text messaging. So if you're building one of these, one of the ways you're going to be judged is adoption. How many people are using it? Make sure you're building it into the communication streams that you already have in place now. Don't wire it into some new novel way of interacting with it just because it's cool and neat. And your difference in adoption is huge. All right. So that was a marketing deck. You've all been blown away by how awesome all the benefits are and how easy it's going to be. And you're ready to sign on the dotted line with JBS tomorrow, right? But then you read all these reports and hear all this negativity around most of these projects fail at a 90% rate or 65% rate. They don't deliver ROI. There's a sad AI guy in the corner. It says dunce, but it looks like ounce. Either way, it's not good. So what is it that kind of causes these projects to fail? What are the things that you should be on the lookout for? Of course, we never made any of these mistakes. We just knew. One of the misconceptions is that your data has to be perfect, and we can't do anything until we have our data perfect. And then once the data is perfect, then we'll be off to the races. I can understand why people have that misconception. Prior to these LLMs and agentic workloads, best in class was machine learning. Machine learning, generally speaking, the better the data and the higher volume of data, the more precise the result can be. Okay? So it is right to say that for some AI workloads, the quality and size of your data is super important, and you don't want to start until it's clean. LLMs actually are kind of the opposite. So an LLM is a series, it's a data structured in a certain way that you can prompt it and it will give data back. So it's a combination of a model, which is just a bunch of data, and then the code that runs that model. The models are huge. They're gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of data. So when you prompt something, if you think about what's actually happening, most of the data came from the LLM. Very little of it came from you. So they can be very resilient to misspellings, to miscategorized data, to incomplete data, to guesses, all that kind of stuff. You don't need perfect or clean data to run these workloads. They're really, really resilient to it. All right, I think I've overemphasized that point to death. Next point. We see this a ton. There's a ton of focus on cool instead of useful. So the amount of times that a CEO has sat down with us and said, my admin or our XYZ department spends so much time doing this, if we just had this cool thing, it would make all of our lives easier. And then you look at it and it's like, well, you're about to spend $50,000 with us or $500,000 with us, whatever. And at the end of it, you're gonna be saving 8 hours of labor a year. It's really cool to demo and it'll look neat, but was it really worth it? So the litmus test that I like to do before we start any project is let's just pretend for a moment, visualize in our heads, this thing is gonna go perfect. It's gonna work exactly as we want. Was it a positive ROI? Was it worth it? And a lot of times you go, oh no, it's not. It's cool, it's flashy. So a lot of the non-ROI projects are just because we did something that was cool instead of something that was useful. Another kind of to drive that point home, never accuse me of overemphasizing something, but here we go. What if we could see our data in such a way? What if we just knew everything about our business? Okay, what would you do differently? Well, if you're not going to change your price, or you're not going to hire more people, or you're not going to change somebody that you're sourcing from, that data might be interesting, but it's not going to change your business. So make sure, even when you're looking at this from a BI perspective, all right? What data points are actually going to change your business? Useful and interesting are not the same thing. All right. The last one. I'm going to beat up on some SaaS guys for a moment. So if you're with the SaaS company, just plug your ears, please. The Salesforces of the world, or the CRMs of the world, the ORM, whatever, they see all this movement, they see all this activity, they go, oh, our engineering team said implementing that LLM was pretty easy, so we have some agentic stuff and we have some cool LLM stuff we can do now. How do we throw a $10,000 a month licensing fee on it and resell it to our customers? Customers look at, oh yeah, this is actually cool, this is useful, let me pay you. The problem is by the time you're on your 5th or 6th or 7th SaaS platform in your enterprise that you're paying separately for this, your data is in all of those different places. It's not unified, all right? If you take a risk and implement some of this stuff yourself with your own LLM and with your own data stores and your own agentic processes using either the BI stack or something more sophisticated, they do exist, you will at least own your data and you will own your LLM, you'll own your tuning, you'll own your agentic strategy. So I would recommend that even though these salespeople are really good and they're buying you wine and giving you swag bags and all that kind of stuff, don't let them sell you the AI stuff. Because I think a couple of years from now, people are going to realize too that they're reselling these LLM tokens at a huge markup versus what market rate is. And if you were to go to every single one of those vendors and they were to charge you $1 per email, you'd say, you guys are crazy, just use my email server, what are you doing? So I hope the market kind of swings in that direction because I'm tired of hearing SaaS companies push people into using their solutions and spreading their data out everywhere and market it up big time. It annoys me because it kind of waters down what is truly a cool and awesome and interesting technology that I think a lot of people should be rolling out. So hopefully we steer away from that. All right. Marketing slide. We make complex simple. Round of applause, and then we'll do questions. There's that awkward moment where you end a talk and you know you're supposed to clap.
Yeah.
And then I'm not supposed to ask for claps.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm glad we got that out of the way. So questions?
Tell me about your partnership with a client company, and they are about to roll out copilot. They have ideas, cool ideas. They don't have a solid governance in place.
Right.
How do you manage that?
So how do we manage governance in general? It's a good question. The reality is that the AI tooling is no different than outsourcing your email, right? When you have an Office 365 subscription, your data is not in your data center, it's not even in your cloud, it's on Microsoft's stuff. Nobody blinks an eye at that. But for some reason, because this is AI and this is new, we go, we can't use all these models, the data's leaving the data center, we're not in control of it, whatever. All the enterprise agreements with all these companies say they will not harness your data, train with it, whatever. So your controls around AI, the best way to dumb it down and simplify it in a way that you don't have to keep yourself up at night worrying for no reason, are the same controls you should have around email, okay? You wouldn't let somebody copy and paste company email into a personal email. You wouldn't let somebody use their personal email to move company files around, all that kind of stuff, same thing. Make sure you're using our AI through our portal with our license, which says you can't train with our data, you can't retain it. So as long as you kind of draw that equivalency, if this is just another tool, make sure they're not using their personal, they're using ours and we're controlling it, then you'll be okay. There's other things, cost management and which models to use and access and all that, but they're pretty straight ahead. The governance thing is pretty simple as long as you keep the right mentality and frame around it.
So my company uses Oracle as their ERP suite, and they're very strict on adding APIs inside of Oracle.
Yep.
That's how it is. So how would you go around adding the AI agent?
How do you get around the Oracle paywall?
And they have their own AI agent. That's
I know. So one of the things that these SaaS companies have started noticing is that because it's so easy, when they expose their data via APIs, you're like, well, they're not buying our agentic crap, they're just using our APIs. Shit, we need to close down the APIs and start raising the price for those. So you can't actually wire up these agents to walk the app by hand as though a human is doing it. That's one way. You can have it access the database directly. That's another way. But if a SaaS vendor really, truly does lock it down, they can even write you a license condition that says you're not allowed to use AI and there's nothing you can do, you have to use theirs. And you're going to see them start moving in that direction until you guys push back and say, well, I'm not going to use Oracle anymore. There are other new startups that are writing these platforms that are saying, bring your own AI. We support it. We will give you the MCP connector. We will give you the APIs. There are a lot more AI-friendly providers out there. So over time, I hope it will shift in that direction and Oracle will go away. Oracle's one of the worst offenders.
Actually, I was going to ask about your system.
Sure.
And how is that when we want to use it, like AI solutions, but I think it's going to be more effective if we kind of tie it in with our copilot. But what does that look like?
It's just calling the APIs to the agents, not that bad. Dayforce is one we've done in particular. Yeah, they're not going to give you an MCP to make it easy, but you can actually, in an interactive session with the LLM, you can say, help me create an MCP for this, and it will do it. And then you just deploy that, and then you can implement these agentic workloads. So it's not as intimidating as it sounds. Any other questions?
Have you seen any limitations to codecs compared to Claude coding?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's where, when we go into what is the difference between an LLM and a harness, an LLM is the model, the harness is the thing that feeds data into and out of the LLM. The underlying models for GPT, for Gemini, for Claude, they're very similar, very have similar parity in terms of their ability to write code. The harnesses are not. The Claude Code harness is light years ahead of everyone else right now. But I expect in 2-3 months that'll change anyway. I know Cursor is a strong competitor. Codex is another one. They're moving as fast as they can. But mostly the problem right now is not in the LLM, it's in the actual harness. Right. Any other questions? All right, thanks. Another awkward applause.
Another round of applause.